One of the major themes in the Gospel of Mark is the messianic secret. Jesus commands the evil spirits not to proclaim him as Messiah. Jesus commands people that he heals not to tell about it, to keep secret, to keep silent in regard to his identity. Now the secret is out. In the end of chapter 10, Jesus is healing a blind man outside of Jericho who publicly proclaims, "Have mercy on me, Son of David," and Jesus does not silence him. And now in chapter 11, Jesus enters Jerusalem under cheer and proclamation of his messianic identity. Let's read. Welcome to yet another tidbit. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen, and we come to chapter 11, and we are to cover from 11, chapter 1 to 12:34, which means that there are certainly many details that we are not able to look into this tidbit. As they approached Jerusalem, I read from the New International Version, and came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples into the village, most likely into the village of Bethphage, according to Talmud, the outer limit of the official city of Jerusalem. Jesus sends these disciples in to fetch a young donkey. It is not specified in Mark that it is a donkey, but if we compare with other Gospels and with the text in Zechariah 9:9 that is alluded to, we realize that is the case. Now, it's a foal, that is, it's an animal that no one has been riding before, but it's not a newborn. And Jesus thereby takes this animal, rides on it in its purity to indicate his purity as a king, and the reference or the allusion to Zechariah 9:9 indicates he's coming not as a conqueror king, not as a warlike conquistador. No, he's coming as a king of peace. He's fulfilling the promise from Zechariah 9:9 of a peaceful king, and he's also taking up the role as a king, which is specified in Genesis 49:10 and 11. And then he rides into Jerusalem. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people, it says in verse 8, spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." This is the Messianic king in the reign of David coming. And they shout, "Hosanna in the highest." And next, Jesus enters Jerusalem. He entered Jerusalem and went to the temple. Now, it's worth noting here that most of the action from now on and a couple of chapters takes place around the temple, but not necessarily in the inner court. Here it is in the royal stoa, that is the area outside of the courts, the area where the Gentiles were allowed also to visit. Next, Jesus returns home. Nothing more happens that day. Well, that is certainly also enough. And then you have three episodes which are together called a sandwich story. You have two scenes with a fig tree, and sandwich in between you have the driving out of those merchants that were earning money on the temple. First, Jesus with his disciples, next morning, walks. Jesus sees a fig tree. It has leaves indicating maybe the fruits are ripe. He walks to the tree. The fruits are not eatable, and he cursed it. Now, cursing it seems like a strange act from Jesus. Wasn't he a kind man? But it's evident that this is what you would call a parable act. Jesus cursed the tree in order to teach the disciples a lesson that would remain in their mind and memory, so that it slowly would dawn upon them what it meant. And then he walks into the temple, and there he sees all those people who are earning their money, profit, by selling and buying, and he turns over the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. It's a quite strong reaction. In a sense, it's violent, it's dramatic. And as he taught them, he says, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations?" He's quoting Isaiah 56. "But you have made it a den of robbers." And now he's adding a phrase from Jeremiah 7:11. It's interesting that Jesus here is in the temple. Many years later, as told in the first book of the Maccabees, a Syrian army chief, Nicanor, came to Jerusalem around the year 165, and he clashed with the priest, and afterwards the priests were praying in front of the altar in the temple, and they were quoting from the same text, Isaiah 56, but instead of reading the words of the prophet that God's house should be a house of prayer for all people, they said, "You have, Lord, chosen this house to be called by your name and to be a house of prayer for your people." This was a more narrow, nationalistic attitude which Jesus refused to follow. Now he in public quotes the promise of the prophet Isaiah about the temple being a house of prayer for all people. As Jesus and his disciples return home to Bethany that evening, they pass the tree that Jesus cursed in the morning, and to their amazement, the disciples discover it has withered. So they comment and they ask Jesus, and he explains. And for us, the explanation is the fig tree is a parable. The fig tree symbolizes the temple. Like the fig tree withers, the service in the temple will stop. We will hear more of that later in the apocalyptic prophecy given by Jesus in Mark 13. Here Jesus explains further to the disciples that prayer will remain. He speaks about the power of prayer and worship, and that is probably necessary in the context of the temple disappearing. There will still be places of prayer. There will still be a God who listens and who answers prayer. The next morning, they once again arrive in Jerusalem, it says in verse 27. And while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priest and the teachers of the law and the elders came to him. Their question is a challenge. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you authority to do this?" This question about the authority of Jesus becomes the most significant question that permeates the following discussions and actions in Mark 11 and 12. The first answer by Jesus is what many wise men sometimes do. They ask a counter question. And as they are unable to answer that question, Jesus doesn't directly answer the question, but that doesn't mean he doesn't answer it. Remember, when you go into chapter 12, this is a continuation. He is still in the temple court. He is still speaking to these people, both the Gentiles and the elders and the scribes that have asked him the question about his authority, and he tells a parable about a vineyard. Such a parable would have been well known as a symbol of Israel, about Judah in particular, known from many texts, among them Isaiah 5. So when Jesus speaks about the owner of the vineyard, everyone knows it's God. And when he speaks about the people that are sent, who are killed, they come to think of the prophets that were killed. And now, when the owner of the vineyard sends his own son, this is the ultimate representative. This is a Messiah. And Jesus say they're going to kill him. They understand, the scribes understand that he's speaking about himself, and he's taking upon himself the authority as the ultimate son, the heir of his heavenly Father. So he answers the question, but not as explicitly or as directly as they would like, so they cannot catch him on that. So many more discussions follow. Jesus has now beaten in discussion the scribes. Now comes the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the final major discussion in chapter 12 in the section we are going to look at today is about the greatest commandment in the law. Jesus wisely interprets by quoting the law, the Torah, the Old Testament itself. He wisely makes it clear what, according to God's original intention, was the highest, the greatest commandments. The commandment of love for God and for fellow human beings. His answer is not in conflict with the law. His answer is the very core of the law itself, and so it has always been. So he closes the mouth of his opponents in his teaching on the temple square. Now, as we move on, we will come to see more sayings about the temple. It's all about this temple, the fig tree that withered. It's all about those buildings that the disciples also admired so strongly. What will happen to them? That will follow as we meet again for the next tidbit. Thank you for listening in to this one. Welcome back.